This week's Who the Folk podcast is sponsored by Joe Nebedrick at Alaris Mortgage. Whether you're buying a home or refinancing, you need a mortgage banker who can put together a fail-proof financing package. Joe Nebedrick at Alaris has the experience you can trust. He's been a Twin Cities mortgage banker for 20 years, and he knows how to navigate complicated funding programs to find the home loan that's right for you. Plus, if you don't close according to your approval letter terms, Alaris will pay the seller $20,000. Go to alaris.com/tcjufolk to start your mortgage application online, or call Joe at 612-730-8282. Alaris Financial NA is a licensed equal housing lender, NMLS ID 416135.
Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk. This week I'm joined by Michael Keller, a former food company executive who last week published his first children's book, The Legend of Jet the Gerbil. We get to know a little bit about Jet, what the publishing process was like, and how Michael transitioned from CEO to author on this week's Who the Folk podcast. Michael Keller, welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Great to be here. Thank you.
So you have quite a journey on your resume, but I want to start with the most recent thing. You are the author. You are a first-time author of a children's book.
I am. I'm a total rookie.
Total rookie. Tell me about Jet the Gerbil.
Oh, good old Jet the Gerbil. So this is my rookie writing journey. So I guess people have been calling me an author. I'm like, well, it's okay, I guess. The book came out a couple of days ago. I suppose with a book out there, I'm a children's book author. But really, the journey has just begun. And Jet the Gerbil is a true story based on a family story that my father and I have been telling orally for over 40 years. And after my corporate career, I needed a big brain break. And one of the things my brain wandered to, and it dragged my heart along with it, was the opportunity to write the story of Jet the Gerbil and tell the story while my father, who's 84 now, was alive to appreciate it and full enough of mind to appreciate it. I did dedicate the book to him. And it is awesome to sort of put down in print this crazy story and have it come to life and hopefully just totally delight kids that read it.
So was Jet the your childhood pet? Is that or was Jet the Gerbil just the book is The Legend of Jet the Gerbil. Was it just a legend, or was Jet actually your pet?
He was actually my pet. So as a young kid, I had a whole bunch of gerbils, saw some really unusual things that a kid doesn't expect to see from gerbils. And then my last gerbil, because I guess I was growing up and maybe we were heading toward dogs as a family or something. My last gerbil was Jet. And he was bigger and stronger and faster and just in general more athletic than all my other gerbils. And he did cool stuff. So he and I became buds. And I have super clear memories of some of the very unusual things he did, especially in comparison to all the other gerbils I had before that. And they were crazy things. Like he used to run on his wheel as fast as he could, and then he would grab the wheel and go flying around the wheel upside down. And believe me, I had never seen that before. And one day I came home from school, walked into my room, and my cat was in Jet's tank, right? So I'm thinking, game over, right? Carnivore in a rodent's tank can't be good. But the cat jumped out. And I don't know if that's because the cat was neurotic or Jet put up a really good front. And I saw him standing up. He was squeaking or doing whatever gerbils do when they're in a state of terror. I learned later that gerbils kind of box each other to sort of sort out dominance. So maybe Jet was doing a little boxing. And so I knew he was a pretty special gerbil. But one day when my father and I were cleaning out Jet's tank, my beloved pet had an absolutely harrowing experience with a household appliance. And it set my father and I off on a fast-paced, high adventure to find, rescue, and ultimately save Jet. And after that, he was a legend in our family. Everyone we told learned about Jet. And when my father retired from cardiology, which factors into the story, I actually spoke at his retirement luncheon. and all these doctors and nurses and hospital administrators around. I had no idea what I was going to say about my father. I hadn't watched him practice medicine. So instead, I told the story of Jet the Gerbil. And it brought down the house, not because I'm a great storyteller, but because truth is stranger than fiction sometimes. And it's a crazy story.
So at what point did you decide this would be a fun children's book? Like I'm always interested how people sort of get to the point where they want to write a book. And children's books are obviously a little bit different challenge when you're trying to write. You're trying to write for like, a 5-year-old, 5 to 8, 5 to 9-year-old, when you're far removed from that age group.
Right. Oh, there's so many.
Okay. So what's the process? How does somebody sort of get to that point?
Great question. And you're right. There's so many challenges connected with it. We can get into some of that too. So I have had books on my mind or on my brain for years while I was an executive. And maybe it was me sort of pining away for doing something different, making a transition, exploring my creative side, various reasons why a book or book ideas were floating around. In many ways, I had assumed it would be a business book. Maybe it was going to be about marketing or branding, or maybe it was a coaching book about personal branding, because that's a lot of the stuff I did. But there was always this notion floating around that maybe it could be something else. And this story has been literally hanging around my family for decades. And I think as I was approaching the end of that phase of my corporate career, not sure if there'll be another phase, but at least that phase of my corporate career, that floated back into my mind again, especially because it represented a significant creative pursuit. But I had no bandwidth. There was just no time. I was running Pearson Candy Company, and it needed all of my attention, and it deserved all of my attention. And to your point, this is a pretty serious process, as I've come to learn. So it was after I left Pearson Candy, and I was taking that brain break, and I was trying to figure out, what am I doing? What's next? All the book ideas came back. And the one that just kept jumping to the top was the story about Jet the Gerbil. And then I started thinking about my dad and getting it out there in the world. And I wanted a creative pursuit. And all of those things sort of pointed toward getting started. And if you want to hear a little bit about the getting started process in the detail, I'd be glad to share that too.
Okay, so what is the starting process for that? Because obviously, so you have this idea. It's an idea that's just imprinted on your mind. It is a legendary story within the Keller family. Was it still hard to get started and actually go through the process of cranking out? Because obviously, a 48-page book is no joke. Like you've got to, it can't just, you distill the story of Jet to me down in like 2 minutes, but obviously you got to stretch it way further out for it to be a book. Otherwise it's a pamphlet.
Very true. And I definitely did not want a pamphlet. I had a vision of a hardcover. Right? So yeah, I would say I stood somewhat paralyzed in the face of Jet the Gerbil at first, because I had never written a book. And from your journalism background, there's nothing easy about writing and writing well, right? And getting everything right, let alone illustrations.
And there's nothing scarier than like knowing you have to write and staring at the blank page.
Right. So one day I did finally start, and it started with me just kind of doing something almost like I might have done from my marketing days that my advertising agencies did that supported me, which I started storyboarding. Basically, I started writing on sticky notes. Then I was sticking those sticky notes on those giant poster-sized pieces of sticky note, and those were going onto the walls. And suddenly my walls were filled with poster paper, which were filled with sticky notes, and I'm just scribbling all over the place. But I guess I had the dam had broken. I must have unleashed something, because the next day I couldn't stop. So once I had finally started putting something down, I just had to keep going on the process. And interestingly, and you might really appreciate this, I'm a TikTok watcher. I guess I have to admit that. I really enjoy it for a variety of reasons. And last fall, came across a young entrepreneur. A young woman, must have been in her mid-20s, and she'd started a business. And she was sort of talking to her followers about starting a business. And she had a great line. She said, one of the things, guys, you have to do is you have to stop thinking that one day you'll start something. Just make today day one. So you have to go from one day to day one. And she was absolutely right, because there was that day that I started scribbling on those sticky notes that turned into day one, and day one literally turned on the clock, and it hasn't stopped since. But it did take kind of getting over that hump of one day I'm going to write a book. Today I'm going to start writing the book.
So obviously, with a novel, you write, there's no pictures, you don't have to worry about it. This is a children's book. It should have pictures. It should have illustrations. Tell me about how you go about finding an illustrator. Cause the cover alone is so vivid and really beautifully done. How did you find, do you audition artists? What's that process?
Almost in some ways. And I will share with you again, given your background in writing. So as it turns out, writing a children's book is particularly hard, not necessarily harder than a novel, but it's particularly hard. As my editor explained to me when I was struggling, you only have 850 or 900 words. So every word has to be right. And I'm like, wow, well, that explains why this is so hard and why so much editing is going on. And then she said, we're doing this on the manuscript. You don't even know what the illustrations look like. The illustrations are going to tell a story too. And you don't have to write things that the illustrations are going to show. I'm like, oh my God, that's another layer of complexity. Like, how do I know what to write if I don't even know what the illustrations are going to look like? So there was this crazy back and forth. So you're absolutely right, insight-wise, about how challenging it could be, even though it's 48 pages or 850, 90 words. So I guess backing up a little bit, first and foremost, I had to decide if I was going to be published or if I was going to self-publish. And to be published, you have to find an agent who wants to represent you, who then presents you to publishers who want to carry you. And then the whole process unfolds from there. That seemed impossible. Timeline wise, I was an unknown author, blah, blah, blah. So I decided to self-publish, which means I kind of had to do everything myself, include hiring a self-publishing services firm here in the Twin Cities called Wise Inc. And they are the ones who helped me find an editor and an illustrator and a book designer and a distributor and all those things. And so they helped me with the search for the illustrator. And crazily enough, Lonnie, we spent months storyboarding, and they were trying to extract from my brain my vision for Jet the Gerbil. And I'm trying so hard to describe it and finding images on Google to describe it and PowerPointing it and all kinds of stuff. We went through a huge search process, like 70 illustrators down to 5, got all their portfolios in, reviewed them all, selected an illustrator who I just thought was wonderful. And then she disappeared. Like literally vaporized. We lost contact with her. Wise Inc. couldn't get a hold of her. She wasn't responsive in any way. We have no idea where she went. And I was totally heartbroken because I thought I had the person who could bring Jet to life. So we had to start all over again. And in the second wave, this woman, Patrizia Danera, who has done the illustrations for The Legend of Jet the Gerbil, she showed up in the second wave of bids, so to speak.
Okay.
And it was ironic that we lost the illustrator I had wanted, but ended up finding somebody like Patrizia who just totally killed it.
And so she wasn't in the first wave that you had reviewed. It was,
she was not.
That was fortuitous.
Yeah, very lucky in so many ways.
So, okay, again, you just sort of compress the timeline down into a few minutes. When did this start? Like when in the was this early 2020, 2019, like how from the first time you started putting the Post-it notes up to the finding Wise Inc. to the book coming out on May 3rd, what's that process like time-wise?
It is a long process, as it turns out. So I've been at this for a little over 2 years. I think I started the first full month after I left my corporate job is maybe somewhere in there is when the sticky notes hit the sticky note.
Okay.
So I'm a little over 2 years from that day to the book actually being available for sale through my distributor and also through Amazon, which was on Monday. Okay. So that was a 2-year process. Now, I will say, to be fair to the process and everyone who helped me, COVID slowed some things down.
Okay.
And in particular, my illustrator lives in Savona, Italy, which is in the province of Liguria, which is next to Lombardy province, which was the epicenter of COVID in Europe.
Yep.
And when we heard everything about like Italy imploding, Italy was imploding all around my illustrator. She was under martial law and lockdown. She got separated from her very senior mom, her daughter, her sister. Everybody was quarantined in different places. She couldn't go out of the house except to go to the pharmacy and the grocery store. So she was stuck in the house with her cats and my project. And so one of the reasons why, to be completely candid with you and share something kind of cool, almost no author dedicates a book to their illustrator. I did dedicate it to my dad, my kids, and my mom who's passed away. But later in the process, I wrote a dedication where I said, also dedicated to my gifted illustrator, Patrizia De Nera, who lives in northern Italy with her loving family. Inspired by Jet, she captured the sweet, bright light in his eyes during the dark days of the COVID-19 pandemic. I just thought what she pulled off was a miracle, and I wanted to recognize her for that. So I dedicated the book in part to her.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I mean, certainly her work, just what I can see is just incredible. And really, you could tell she put her, whole self into it. I mean, the craft is incredible.
You're right. That's a great perception. It is true. And certainly like a million levels above my craft. I do stick figures.
Oh, same here.
Right?
I'm with you.
That's it.
So you keep mentioning the corporate career you left. You were the CEO at Pearson, which if people don't know Pearson, they probably know the salted nut roll.
Exactly.
You're the chief marketing officer for Dairy Queen. You worked at Jamba Juice before that. You've been at some massive locally based food companies, like obviously places that everybody knows. I guess, how did you get into the food field? It seems a little more, I would think, specialized than maybe, being CEO at some other type of, corporate job.
That's a great question. It's funny, as often I've been asked about my career and things that have happened in various roles. There's very few people who have actually asked me, how did that start? It started a couple ways. One is I grew up in a family that was in the supermarket business in New Jersey.
Okay.
So my mother worked for my grandfather, her father, in the supermarket business. It was called Foodtown Supermarkets. It was a chain of like 30 or 40 grocery stores in central Jersey, basically. And so the food business was sort of swirling around me. My mother was a bit of a foodie. My grandfather was a foodie. And while my dad was a physician and had nothing to do with that, I just had like food was floating around, right?
Sure.
So I went off to college, took a consulting job after college, which was just awful. Went back to business school, still had no idea what I was up to, but in business school, I kind of figured out the marketing thing. And lots of companies came to campus. And this is also a very true story. And I hope I don't hurt any Vikings fans' feelings, but I'm from the East Coast, so I'm a New York Giants fan originally, although I am a huge Minnesota United fan. So I have
here.
One big time local fan favorite of the United. So I was a New York Giants fan growing up in New Jersey, like most people would be. And all these companies came to my business school's campus to do interviewing. And you just kind of had to do it. So I did it. And I went on a bunch of interviews. And I went on this one interview with this guy from Nestle Chocolate Company. Oh. And I'm like, all right, I'll talk to Nestle Chocolate Company. And so he saw on my resume that I was a New York Giants fan because I had that on my resume at the time. So all we talked about was New York Giants for 40 minutes. He's like, look, I mean, I know the schools you went to and the jobs you've had so far. You can do this job. I just wanted to see what kind of person you were, if I could like hang out with you all day long. And so we talked about the Giants, and that started me at Nestle Chocolate Company, which ironically is how I ended my career at Pearson Candy Company, sort of bookended with candy. And once I got into the packaged goods food world, which is like, food you buy in a grocery store, right, convenience store, all that kind of stuff. It was a little slow paced for me at that time when I was a 20 something with a lot of energy. And I wandered into the realm of what's called quick service retail, or, fast food, so to speak. Yeah. And I joined the Baskin-Robbins ice cream team at that time. So yet another ice cream brand. So it's kind of funny that what brought me to Minneapolis was Dairy Queen. And I had actually had some Baskin-Robbins experience way in my past. Once I got into the world of multi-unit retail food service, brands like that, restaurant brands, franchisee driven brands, kind of got hooked. And my next 20, 25 years was all in multi-unit retail food service. Baskin-Robbins, brand called Kookaroo, which is like an upscale Boston market, and then Jamba Juice, and then Dairy Queen.
Okay. And then to Pearson's.
Then to Pearson's. And one of the ironies is it's very funny. People laugh about this all the time. I don't really even like food. Like, I'm not really a food. I like eat because I have to.
Sure.
I don't really have great taste buds. To me, like a hot dog is every every bit as good to me as like a steak. I mean, I'm almost indifferent. Like a donut is totally fine for me. But what I do really like is how much people like food and how they build their lives, their families' lives, their social lives around food and food experiences. That's fun. And so I stayed connected to that for a long time.
I would think that would make it actually really enjoyable to do those jobs that you did. Not the part about, you know, certain foods like being indistinguishable from each other, but the joy that it can bring to other people. And especially when, you know, being in the marketing world, that's got to be such a great piece to bring into the job with you.
Yeah, I agree. That's a good insight, Lonnie, because one of the things I really liked, especially at my Dairy Queen job here in the Twin Cities, I was there for 10 years as chief marketing officer. My job, our team's job, was to bring the brand to life for the American public. You know, that was our job. We had to present the Dairy Queen brand, hopefully in a more modern form, because Dairy Queen had been around for a while. And we did that through national television advertising and regional television advertising and all that kind of stuff you would expect. And it was a really fun, not only because we had a great brand to work with and it was fun to tell a story like that, but I got to work with some unbelievably brilliant, insightful, creative people, you know, who would write our scripts and find our actors and produce our commercials. And I got exposed in a pretty deep way to some of the most remarkable creative talent I had been exposed to in my career up to that point. And to be totally candid, not necessarily to bridge back to the book, but there's lots of links back to it. That experience I had with that element to the creative process made me crave something like that again while I was a CEO who was disconnected from the creative process. I kind of wanted to get back to something fun, enjoyable, entertaining. And in the case of kind of Dairy Queen to a degree, and absolutely The Legend of Jet the Gerbil, it was about thrilling and delighting kids. Yeah. And just the idea that I could contribute something that way, in addition to doing something for my dad and getting something out of my head, that was pretty cool. And that's part of, I think, what drew me in.
And also that time at Dairy Queen, if I recall correctly, it feels like it's about the time where they made, like, the jump was made from like the smaller sort of roadside walk up or, you know, barely walk in shops to, you know, maybe more in strip malls or, you know, slightly bigger locations. It seems like that was about the time. If I recall correctly, I may be wrong and they may have had them for longer, but it seems like that was about the time you were there was about the time it sort of made that jump.
Yeah, there was a big jump. And some of it my team and I got to work on, especially a really big modernization jump for the Dairy Queen brand. And we became a very significant national advertiser to compete against all the other big food service brands. But on the other side of the Dairy Queen equation, like our operations team and our real estate team and our design, architecture, and construction team, DQ Grill and Chill emerged during that time. And ultimately, almost every Dairy Queen in the country was in one form or another headed towards some version of DQ Grill and Chill, which in many cases was like a full-on treat/food restaurant. Especially here in the Twin Cities, there was a really significant effort in that direction because this is one of the most important markets for DQ. So yes, you were watching the modernization of the brand real time.
And there's a Grill and Chill dangerously close to my house. Like,
yeah, that's
like
problem.
About 5 minutes. 5 minutes. No. It's about a 5-minute drive if the lights break just the right way, but it's still right. a little close for my liking.
So a little fun fact on my watch, my team's watch, because there were so many of us involved in doing this, we launched the Mini Blizzard. And the Mini Blizzard was a really big deal, no pun intended there. It was a transformational product launch for our flagship brand Blizzard underneath Dairy Queen. And it took years to figure that out and test that out. And it was really cool to launch the Mini Blizzard. That was one of the last things I had the opportunity and the honor to do with my teammates before I left.
So were you at Dairy Queen when Mark Cuban made the quip about certain NBA refs not being qualified to work at Dairy Queen?
Indeed. And it was my team and I said, well, we can't take that lying down. And so we challenged him to manage a Dairy Queen. And that was an enormous PR event for us.
That was huge. I mean, I still remember him being behind the counter, making the blizzards, holding them upside down, and huge.
It was huge.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So do you miss corporate life now that you're a published author? You've got a long history of, you know, some high pressure, you know, big responsibility jobs behind you. Do you miss that?
Wow, that's a great question too. I'm trying to figure that out. So I know that in the first year after I left Pearson's, I needed a break. I think I had run myself nearly into the ground, lost a lot of hair. My kids, a lot went on in their lives. I'd like to be a very engaged father, and it was really hard to balance those two. I was newly married. That was challenging as well. So I really needed a break. Then what's interesting is after that brain break, and I've really spent the last year trying to reflect on, do I want to, should I return to that life? Because this life of working on a book, and I was working on a startup at the time that I've sort of parked, and I'm now doing some work with a really cool small consulting firm here in town called Pinnacle Performance Group, doing some cool work with them. A lot of time with my wife, with my kids, with my dogs, able to work out. I'm able to enjoy some of the, for lack of a better term, Lonnie, privilege of sort of the position I've been in over time. And I am trying to sort that out. I will tell you this, it doesn't appear like there's a lot of money to be made in publishing a children's book. So at some point, I'm going to have to figure out, what it means to be, post-career, so to speak, and whether I return to it in some format or not. What I do know, to that little quip that I made, is I do feel very privileged to be in a position to have the time and the financial resources to actually produce a book like this. And one of the reasons why I chose a cause marketing partner to donate proceeds to Young Authors Publishing out of Atlanta, they publish books for 8 to 14-year-old Black and brown kids to get their voices out into the world, because they don't have the capital and they don't have access to the publishing industry. And I figured, well, if I have the privilege to do all of this, maybe one of the things I could do to pay it forward is to support an organization that's trying to provide that access to kids who would otherwise not have that access. And so there's sort of a long story arc to this that I'm really trying to play out inside the book.
Well, I mean, that's such a great cause, because that's a demographic that is, I would imagine, because of the lack of resources you spoke of, is very underrepresented in the publishing world.
Incredibly underrepresented. I didn't even realize how underrepresented till I leaned into it a little bit. And not unlike Hollywood, which has only just started, right, to move in the direction of and be influenced significantly by people of color, the book industry is very, very similar. It's really it's an old industry that tends to be dominated by white identifying people, and in particular men. That the male barrier is breaking down a little bit. Of course, there's been over the last few decades plenty of incredibly talented women who have risen to high ranks in the industry, but still the industry is bent toward white identifying people. And it's not been easy for whether you're an executive or you're an author, or let's say you're a child author trying to get your start. The industry is just not set up for their success, but a lot of things are starting to happen. And over time, I think it will be.
Well, and it's great that, I mean, it's such a worthy endeavor that the partnership, with the proceeds from the book going, some proceeds going to that. It's a worthy endeavor, and I applaud that decision to
thank you
to give back in that way. It's a nice piece of tzedakah.
I appreciate that. Good word for it too.
Thank you. Well, Michael, last couple of questions for you, and we will get you out of here. And because of, I'm going to ask you this one first, just because what you said about food earlier, I'm curious to how you're going to answer. What is your favorite Jewish food?
Well, this, okay, so I'm just going with what came to my mind. Now, I don't
Please.
know if you would call it Jewish food, but it's close. And I think it's a favorite because it's what I grew up with. Again, it's what I was sort of surrounded by. But I, unlike my kids and all my friends and virtually everyone I know, I love tuna fish. And I eat tuna fish sandwiches fairly regularly. And it's chicken of the sea for me. And I don't know if there's any tie to gefilte fish or if there's any tie to other fish that swirled around me as a kid, because I would never touch whitefish or herring or all those scary things that my father ate, my grandfather ate. It was terrifying. Even gefilte fish started getting really weird when I was about a teenager. But tuna, I don't know why. I'm not even a fish eater. Like I told you earlier, I don't love food. I'm not a gourmand. I am not a foodie. So fish is totally, Jaws scared me out of all seafood. All seafood, everything. There's nothing that I eat except for tuna fish, which is arguably chicken of the sea anyway.
Okay. Is there any drawback to, like, kiddish lunch at synagogue as a kid where they'd have like the tuna salad, on the table or anything like that? Or,
I don't think I remember those because I think I was wandering around the temple or the Hebrew school at the time, maybe with a girlfriend or maybe with my buddies. I don't remember participating that way.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. What is your favorite Jewish holiday?
Well, let's see. Interesting balance of things to sort through. Well, I guess, my fondest memories, to the degree that I have them and they're relatively clear, the one that my family seemed to organize around the best back on the East Coast growing up was Passover. And it felt like that was the best occasion to draw my extended family together. And I have really distinct memories of being in my now passed away grandfather and grandmother's apartment in Highland Park in New Jersey. I have these just odd images of that. And there were a lot of people there and it was a lot of family. And that was the holiday that pulled the family together. So I think I would lean back on that one.
Okay. Popular answer. And it always comes back to family getting together.
There's a lot of truth to that. And Hanukkah kind of does that too, but not the way Passover did.
It seems different. I know it just seems different though. So I get that. Well, Michael Keller, thank you so much for joining me. The book is The Legend of Jet the Gerbil. It is available on Amazon. You can get more info at jetthegerbil.com. Thank you for joining us, and good luck with whatever comes next for you.
Thank you, Lonnie. I really appreciate it. I appreciate the well wishes.
The Who the Folk podcast is part of the Jew Folk Podcast Network, a product of Jew Folk Inc. Please subscribe, rate, and review the show wherever you get your podcasts. If you have suggestions for other podcast guests, please email them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. For our other shows, check out tcjewfolk.com/podcast.